Thank you all for joining us again for the Bible's Books of Wisdom. I love these books. I think they're fascinating. And tonight we're with Ecclesiastes. So we've been chit-chatting a little bit, and I've got some idea, but did any of you get a chance to read the book this week? Or have you read it in the past?
Yes and yes.
Yeah?
Didn't finish.
What are your thoughts? Do you like it? Is it depressing? Is it challenging? Was it an easy read? What did you think?
For me, this is Tony. For me, it was I read it several times. I wouldn't call it an easy read. At times it felt pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I knew, for me, the message in the end is not.
Right.
But and repetitive. Sometimes I kept finding myself saying, why does he keep saying this? Didn't he say this before? And but then I read somewhere that in Hebrew literature, the more something is repeated, the more important it is. So I figured that it was a message, whatever seemed to be repetitive to me must be something that really needed to get across.
Yeah, that's definitely true a lot of times, and you'll see different tropes repeated throughout the Old Testament, and a lot of that too helps with memorization. If you're a culture that's not typically literate, how do you remember all these stories? Well, repetition.
Yes, that's right.
And there's a Babylonian text called the Enuma Elish, which is kind of a creation story, and gets compared to Genesis 1 all the time. And there'll be like something will happen, then they'll tell the messenger what happened and repeat verbatim what just happened. Then the messenger will go and tell a king and repeat it a third time. And again, I think that's so it stays in your mind. So if you've got the herald or the minstrel or whoever is, reciting this, the people hear it multiple times. So there is that. And we'll talk a bit about why it's repetitive like that here. But that's a really good thought. Anybody else? What are your thoughts on the book? All right, well, hearing none, I'll share mine. I actually really, really like this book, which probably means you all think I'm now twisted and weird, which is fine. But I like it because I think it speaks to almost any generation, and especially an affluent culture like ours. I think it speaks in rather powerful terms on things. And I'll talk about why I think that's the case as we go through. Let me go ahead and share my screen as we jump in. Now, this book, for those of you who've read it, you've probably already noticed that it's a bit challenging, can be weird, repetitive, and kind of why was that said? Please feel free to interrupt. I've got a couple of spots where I'm going to pause and ask for questions. But if something goes by and you're like, that doesn't sound right, that's not what I read, I thought it meant this, or I'm totally lost, please jump in and let's have more of the conversation. If we don't get through all the slides, that's fine. I'm going to put all the slides in the toolbox at the end of the class anyway, so you'll get them all eventually. So I'm going to start off again with what I've done the past couple of times with a review of the retribution principle, because I do think it's important to keep all of this in mind. As I've said from the beginning, I think so many of these wisdom books are in conversation with each other and are intended to be that way. Very much like if you have a diamond, really grasping the beauty of the diamond is to tilt it in different ways and see each facet through a different beam of light, and the colors come through. And what I love about sacred scripture is it's not monolithic. It's very multifaceted, and there's different layers to it. And so looking at it different ways really helps bring out the beauty of what God is saying to us in sacred scripture. So again, to review the retribution principle, in Proverbs, we get kind of the ideal, the way we want life to be. Good people get blessings, bad people get curses. That's the way it ought to work. You're a good person, you're just, righteous, holy, loving, you should get a long life, lots of land, lots of wealth, a happy family. And if you're not good, you're selfish, stuck up, you only think about yourself, you hurt other people, you should go to jail. You should have an early death. You should end up in poverty and things like that. When we studied Job, of course, we saw that it kind of did this. You have Job, the epitome of a righteous man, ends up with the epitome of cursings, and the text kind of wrestling with that. And I would say if I'm going to keep going along with this chart, I would say this is Ecclesiastes. Like, what do you do with the messiness that is life? And in searching for meaning and how things work out and what's going on, it's kind of this convoluted, jumbled up knot of stuff. And that's part of why the book is going to feel the way it does. So turning to some of the technical stuff about this, title and authorship is important, I think. The book in Hebrew is called Kohelet or Koheleth. And that's the title. It's frequently translated as preacher or teacher. So in my Bible, which is the New Revised Standard, the very first line is the words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. That word teacher there is Koheleth. So it's usually translated as preacher or teacher, depending on your translation. And it comes from the root kahal, which means to gather, to assemble, to collect. And I think it's pretty much always used of people. So it's not gathering sticks, stones, bricks, money, anything like that. It's gathering people together. And in Greek, this comes in as Ecclesiastes, from where we get this. And if you know some Greek, you might see the root of ecclesia in there, from which we get church. And so this is a gathering. So whoever this guy was, this is probably a title, not a name. I don't think the guy was going out there, hi, my name is Gatherer. But it's probably a title of some sort. He organizes people, brings them together to worship, to teach them, to assemble together, to be in conversation. And there are parts where it looks like this person might be a king, right? That first verse again, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Certainly sounds like a king, and being the son of David sounds an awful lot like King Solomon. If we turn over to verse 12, I, the teacher, when king over Jerusalem and king over Israel in Jerusalem, basically claims to be a king. And again, as it sounds like Solomon. So that's a possibility, and traditionally, I would say that's what most people think. So when was the book written? Well, if it was Solomon, about 950 BCE. Problem is there are some verses that suggest maybe this isn't Solomon. So in chapter 2, verse 7, it mentions about how he had more possessions, more herds, more flocks than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. Well, if it's King Solomon, there have only been two kings in Jerusalem, David and Solomon. So who are all these other people he's talking about? That seems a little odd. Same thing in verse 9. I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. And if it's Solomon, there's not that many there. There are several places throughout the text where it seems like if this person was king, they should be able to fix some of the problems that are raised within the book. Let me see if I can find a good example here out of one of those. Yeah, keep the king's command. Like, is that something he's learned? Or if he is king, what's going on? And there's just some other stuff when he starts talking about oppression and he visits this town where there was a wise youth who overtook a king. It really seems like perhaps this person's not a king and can't solve the problems that he sees. So some other stuff here too is there are some Persian loan words. And if this is in fact, if the original to the text, then this thing couldn't exist until after Persia. And Persia really comes to rise to power in the 6th century of before Common Era, not in the 10th century. And there's also lots of signs of Greek influence. So Stoicism, Epicureanism, Cynicism. There seems to be hints that either this book gleaned from Greek culture, or it was just at a time where these things were starting to be discussed. And again, that would push it to a later date. So the short answer is, like with all of these things, we don't know when it was written. We don't know exactly who wrote it, but it is quite possibly as late as 250 BCE, which is quite a span there of what, 700 years or so between Solomon and them. And I would say most scholars put it towards the later date at this point, but the short answer is we really don't know. This then makes it fall under what's called pseudepigrapha. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but this is exactly what Proverbs was. Basically what it is somebody writes something under the name of somebody else who used to be famous, influential, may have been an author themselves. we can look at this, and if somebody was to do this nowadays, I'd run them through Turnitin software and hit them for plagiarism in my class. But more than likely, it's not an intent to deceive, but to basically say my work is in the vein of this person that my pen name is. So if I was to write this under the name of Daniel, you might expect immediately I'm going to be writing stories about people who stood up against the empire and did what was right, or who continued to pray to God and suffered the consequences. If I was to write, in the name of Moses, maybe I think I've gotten a prophetic word from God that I now want to pass on to the people, or I've received commands from God, or I'm going to be the great liberator and tell you a story about setting captive people free. And so it's more likely to show continuity and kind of a tip of the hat to the person who was there. And this was an incredibly common literary device in antiquity, incredibly common. So I don't necessarily see it as being deceptive and wrong, but kind of setting you up. And so by saying from the get-go, this is likely Solomon, even though it never says Solomon, you kind of think this is going to be something about either wisdom or women. Because that's pretty much all Solomon's known for, wisdom and women. I guess the temple in there too. But you kind of set it up. You think this is going to be about wisdom. Some examples of mostly Jewish pseudepigrapha: the Testament of Abraham, the book of First Enoch, which I've read a couple of times. It's a very strange text, and it's worth your time just to get familiar with this at some point. The Assumption of Moses, the book of Jubilees, which is really a retelling of a lot of Genesis and Exodus. It is a great book. And the Apocalypse of Peter. So it's a second or third century Common Era text retelling the resurrection of Jesus. And when Jesus walks out of the tomb, his head goes all the way up into the clouds, and the cross walks out behind him and starts talking. Not written by St. Peter, but is trying to be in the vein of St. Peter, of giving us, beautiful stuff about our Lord. And all of these things are well worth reading. So anyway, just a little bit of background there for stuff. Now we come into the chaotic structure of this book. And this one is all sorts of fun to try and map out. And if we thought dating this thing was hard, trying to organize it is even harder. And pretty much as many scholars as have studied this text, you get about that many different outlines for this thing. It is a tough book to follow. And I think we've somewhat mentioned that already. It comes across very much as like a stream of consciousness. So if you think through, maybe back in your days, if you ever took a philosophy class, or back in geometry, or just in your work life, where you try and solve a problem and then write down all the mental things your mind does as you're doing them. You see the triangle, so you write down triangle. Then you go, oh, wait, now what were the formulas? Is it angle, angle, side, angle? What's the hypotenuse? And you just start writing this down as you think about it. You're going to end up repeating yourself. You might contradict yourself. You might challenge yourself. You might misremember things. And that's kind of what goes on here, is as Kohelet, as I'm going to call him throughout this, really tries to wrestle with meaning and with value and what's worth his time and stuff like that, you really kind of get this stream of consciousness. So I think it was it Tony or Arlene or Alice? I forget which one of you said that you found him very repetitive. I kind of want to come back as an editor and group all the stuff he says about wisdom together, all the stuff he says about God together, all the stuff he says about work and toil together. But it's not like that. And it's not even like that with style. There are places where there's poetry, there's places where there's prose. And again, which was nice about Job, you had those two endings that were all prose, everything else in the middle was poetry. That's helpful. That's not helpful here. It's just all over the place and goes back and forth. One thing that's rather interesting to note is the book kind of gives you third person at the beginning. What is it? The word of the teacher, Vanity of Vanities says the teacher. At the end, it comes back to that. Vanity of Vanities says the teacher. And then throughout most of the rest of the book, it's all in first person. I searched this out. I asked my heart. I did these things. And so you kind of get this framing on the outside of it as being third person. And a lot of people think that framing in third person may have been written by a different author rather than the original. So that the stuff that's all in first person was Kohelet's thought, And then the stuff on the outside is summary and reflections on Kohelet's thought. That's a possibility. The one verse that's really weird is in 729. It reverts back to the teacher for no apparent reason. And then it just moves on. And you would think and you would hope that maybe we can divide the book there. There's 2 sections, chapter 1 through chapter 7, and then chapter 8 through chapter 12. But again, that doesn't work. Continuing on with this chaotic structure. So rather than themes, a scholar named Addison Wright said we should pay attention to repeated phrases. And in particular, he paid attention to chasing after the wind, not find or who can find, and no one can know, and saw that these seemed to cluster, some of them at the beginning of the book and some at the end of the book. And if you pick up any of the 3 books I've recommended for this course, all of them follow Addison Wright's suggestion here with slight nuances. So they all do it in slightly different ways. So for instance, McLaughlin, he actually splits it up into 3 main sections, one on chasing after the wind, one on not finding, one on not knowing, whereas Ballantyne just sees it as 2 sections, going up to the first half of the book and then the second half of the book. That's the best we've got. And again, the themes are not uniform all throughout this. You would almost hope there's certain themes talked about at the beginning, certain at the end. It's not like that. It goes on. This is the best I can come up with, so that's what we're going with. So to take a look at this as to what's actually coming up, this is Ballantyne's structure for this. And again, you can see the intro with thematic statement and a conclusion with thematic statement. They're kind of in parallel. Then you have those 2 poems, one on the futility of life, one on inevitability of death. Those are in parallel. And then the stuff in the middle is also in parallel. So life is changing after wind, and no one can know what is good. And so it's not that this is an outline that one goes under each other, but it shows the parallels of how it goes through. And then you have this appendix, this ending that baffles most scholars. Like, where did this come from? Why do we have it? And what does it do for our understanding of the book? Okay, so that was a lot there. Let me pause for questions. Any thoughts here, questions? If not, I got some for you. All right, so by way of introducing ourselves to the content of the book, I'm kind of curious, and anybody can blurt this out if you like. If somebody was to ask you how they could find real meaning in life, where would you point them?
Do you mean necessarily from Ecclesiastes or just
No.
throughout the Bible?
No, just
I
from
always
your
tend to go to Psalms.
Psalms. Okay, why Psalms?
I usually find a lot of inspiration in the Psalms. I never really thought of Ecclesiastes, definitely, but the Psalms is a default for me.
I definitely would not send them to Ecclesiastes. Yeah, any other answers to that? And it doesn't have to be in scripture. I mean, it could just be, from your own experience in life. Or where do you think our culture would point people for meaning?
Just a really out there answer would be the Farmer's Almanac. There's all kinds of stuff in there about weather, about agriculture, about producing gardens and taking care of animals. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah, we're getting, somebody's, Melissa's grandmother loved the Farmer's Almanac. Mm-hmm. Somebody else said that they go to Dr. Phil. Well, how's that working for you?
I would say culturally, my elders, so my grandparents, my great aunts and uncles, I always go to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, all great answers. Yeah. So this is going to be one of the topics that comes up, which is kind of why I want us thinking about it. And I want you to see where he goes for these answers. Second question.
Sorry, can I interject?
Oh, please.
Sorry, I think a lot of people culturally go to Google.
Yeah.
They Google it, right?
Yeah. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with British comedy and have ever seen the IT Crowd. But in brief, it's about these two guys that work in an IT department for some company. And anyway, their boss finally looks at like all the mess in their office and was like, how can you guys live like this? And one of the guys' computer starts typing, how can you guys, no, don't Google the question, man. You might be on to something there, Sandra. Okay. What are some things you really enjoy in life? What brings you happiness? What brings you joy?
Well, for me, relationships certainly
Relationships.
yeah.
Yeah.
And let's say spending time with my family.
Spending time with family. Yeah, very good.
Music.
Nature and food.
I'm with you on the second one. Yeah, nature and food. Yeah. I mean, you can see some of the stuff for me, but behind here, I love board games, love to play games. That brings me lots of joy. Yeah. And then, so the question is what is something that might make even these things that you enjoy lose their joy? Where you just, you look at them and go, or I don't want that anymore. Or what's the point?
Well, I think for me, if relationships became very, very difficult.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
I think if there wasn't a choice, like if the only thing you could do was play board games. Okay, that'd be okay. All right.
No, I know what you mean.
Liked them.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, and there's a sense, when I was in a class on world religion and studying Buddhism and thinking through suffering, it's like anything that you enjoy can eventually become suffering. And the illustration that was used was pizza. You know, everybody loves pizza, but when you get around to that like fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh piece, you don't feel so good anymore. And now this pizza that once brought you joy is now bringing you suffering. So I actually think that was a really good answer. So I ask these questions because this is kind of where Kohelet's thought goes, is thinking through kind of the meaning of life, thinking through what brings joy, and then what can ruin all of that. And so I want us to step through these things, and somewhat what I'm going to do is spend most of my time in the first third of the book and pretty much go back to back to back on things so that you get a sense of how he thinks and how his flow of thought goes. And then we'll talk more thematic stuff towards the end. So the book starts out, if you remember my structure, with these introductory thematic statements. And it starts off by saying, Hevel of Hevels, everything is Hevel. Or if you read many translations, it's vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Or meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless, which is really an encouraging way to start out your book. Well, if it's meaningless, why am I going to read page 2? This all comes from the Hebrew word hevel, which really means breath or vapor. And so it's something that doesn't last, something you can't grasp. It's there 1 minute, gone the next minute, and is kind of fleeting, something along those lines. So our 3 scholars that I've highlighted for us to read, Valentine basically says it's pointless, McLaughlin says it's transitory, and Murphy goes with the more traditional vanity. But really kind of pointing at how insubstantial, how fleeting, and how quickly it moves on. And from the get-go of the book, he's saying everything is pointless, transitory, or vain. Everything. I hope that causes you to bristle, because I think it should. And this is difficult. And so the question is, how did he get here? So then he starts with this opening poem. And some of this you might recognize. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, the earth remains forever. Sun rises, sun goes down, hurries to the place where it rises, and so on. Right? And it basically shows everything is happening again and again and again. So what do we get from doing anything? Nothing. What contributions are you making? And it kind of comes from the rest of this poem. If the world is static and never changes, then everything becomes wearisome, and you can't make a lasting contribution to anything. All things are wearisome, more than anyone can express. The eye's not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. And it goes on later and says, even the people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come by those who come after them. There's a book by Thomas Howard called On Being Catholic, where he kind of explains to nominal Catholics and non-Catholics why they do and believe all the things that they do, you know, whether it's ritual or theology or whatever. And in one chapter on Mary, he talks about hiddenness and how we know the names of the pharaohs and the kings and have come down, but what about the people who actually built the pyramids? What were their names? What were their wives' names? Did they have children? What did they do on Saturday to relax? And we know nothing about any of these people. They've been lost to us throughout history, despite the great monument that they've created. So there's something to this, and it causes Kohelet distress. He moves on from there to this search for meaning, and he investigates a whole bunch of different areas in life. And this is an internal search. He says over and over again that I'm talking to myself. I gave my heart to do these things. I considered this, then I considered that. And he kind of jumps from one thing to the other, looking for meaning. Places that he looks, he starts and ends with wisdom, or not quite ends, but he looks at wisdom. And again, as if we think about this as having the right skill and knowledge to accomplish the task, that's what I think he's talking about. What point is there to wisdom? And his conclusion here, I applied my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is a chasing after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase in knowledge increase in sorrow. George Orwell picks this up years later, and ignorance is bliss. Right? If wisdom is going to, and knowledge is going to bring us sorrow, ignorance is going to bring us bliss. So then he turns from wisdom to pleasure, and he acquires wine and food and houses and vineyards, pools, servants, silver and gold, women, everything you could possibly imagine. He's living the Hollywood lifestyle. He's got it all. There's nothing that money can't buy. But even this, of course, he sees is hevel and a chasing after wind, because there was nothing to be gained under the sun. He turns to toil and work, and he looks at other things there. And so why is all of this hevel? Why is it all a chasing after the wind? Well, because both the wise and the foolish die, because the estate must be left to somebody else, and who knows whether they're going to take good care of it. I mean, my goodness, have you ever seen somebody inherit a fortune and just squander it? I've seen that in the tabloids. Right? So what purpose was it for their parents to work so hard to amass this huge fortune if at some point they've basically just got to pass it along? The big problem in all of this is death. Death ruins all of it. And it makes everything hevel. Why work hard? Why bother to be wise? Why get all of this stuff if I'm just going to die and have to leave it to somebody else? Real happy text so far. Right? So what are we supposed to do? And he gets into this next. What are we supposed to do? This is actually quite a lovely text and a conclusion from here. There is nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to one who pleases him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he gives the gathering and heaping, only to give to the one who pleases God. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Right? Enjoy what God gives you now, realizing that that's a gift from him. And then if you notice at the second half of verse 26, he starts to hint at that retribution principle. God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to the people who please him, but to sinners, they get the work of gathering and heaping, only to give it to those who actually do please God. So he's got that in the back of his mind here. But death ruins all of this other stuff in his search for meaning in life. So all he can conclude then is eat, drink, be merry. Enjoy your life, enjoy your toil. And yet, he concludes that at the very end saying, this is also hevel and a chasing after the wind. But you were going uphill, man. You were going positive. Why now are you coming back to this? It's almost frustrating. Then he turns to a text that I'm sure we've all sung at one point in our lives. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time for every purpose under heaven. It's amazing how much scripture and things like that find their way into pop culture. This whole poem gives, as you probably know, the list of opposites, positives, and negatives. There's a time to be born, a time to plant, a time to die, a time to plant, time to pluck what's planted, time to kill, time to heal, a time for war, a time for peace, a time for silence, a time to speak, a time for love, a time for hate, and so on. It basically runs through all aspects of life, from birth to death, and shows that clearly everything is under God's providence, because this stuff is well ordered, it's structured, and there's a time for it. And if the times are predetermined, somebody had to predetermine them. And so I think the undercurrent there is God's done it. The question is this good or bad news? Because it is not clear. It basically just gives you this poem, and that's it. Was the poem good? Is it bad? What am I supposed to do with this? I think it's possible to see what comes next as a reflection on this poem. And so the next question immediately after the poem is, what gain do workers have from all their toil? I've seen the business that God's given to everyone to be busy with. He's made everything suitable for its time. That could be a reference back to that poem. Moreover, he's put a sense of past and future, or your translation might say, he's put eternity into their hearts, yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So everything's got its purpose. It's been set in place by God. But it's not clear that that's a good thing. God's made everything suitable, but we can't figure out what God's doing. So once again, he comes back and says, I know there's nothing better for people to do than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. It's God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their toil. And that's nice. Whatever God does endures forever, so stand in awe and enjoy what he does for you. That's kind of bad, indicating that there's no gain in toil. Then he switches, and he actually starts to see that God is going to judge both the wicked and the dead, and that there is indeed a time for judgment. I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, wickedness was there as well. That's not good. There's injustice in the world. My goodness, haven't we seen a lot of that recently? Dear heavens, am I sick of seeing that. But then he says, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for he's appointed a time for every matter and for every work. And that sounds like the poem. So it's both good and bad. There's bad stuff because it seems like we just run the rat race to no point, yet God's in charge so we can be happy, we can enjoy life, and we know that eventually God's going to sort it out and wickedness will get judged. From this, he changes topics to talk about the effects of death. And in giving us a really happy assessment here, he talks that God tests us to prove that we're just like animals. Because animals die, people die, we all go in the ground, we have the same fate, so how are we better than any animals? It's all just hevel. But enjoy your life. Then he says that non-existence is better than oppression. I saw all the oppressions that are practiced under the sun. Look, the tears of the oppressed, with no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, but there was no one to comfort the oppressed. And I thought the dead who've already died more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who's not yet been born and has not seen the evil deeds that are under the sun. Death, he says, is better than life because then you're not facing the oppression. But to not even be born yet, you don't get to see it, you don't get to experience it. Life's happy in the womb. It's when you take that first breath that things start to go downhill. Again, it seems to be this death thing is ruining a lot of stuff for Kohelet here. He then switches his topics yet again, and he looks at envy and toil. He says that all toil and all skill and work come from envying other people. They made a widget, I have to make a better widget. They made $100, I need to make 105. They've got a happy family, I need a happier one. And for him, as you can well imagine, this is hevel and a chasing after wind. It's vanity, it's meaningless, it's transitory. Something is wrong here. He then gives us these two proverbs: fools holding their hands consume their own flesh, and better is a handful with quiet than two handfuls with toil and a chasing after wind. And as I was saying before all this started, I really appreciate those days where I'm bored and my handfuls are empty and I can just sit in quiet and peace and relax. Switching yet again, he mentions working together and the importance and the benefit of that. And he starts by talking about people who are by themselves. They're alone. They have no family. And you can think, well, what's bad about that? That doesn't sound too bad. There are plenty of people who opt to be single. They don't want to be married. They don't want children or anything like that. But what he says is that if somebody is by themselves, then they have to struggle and toil by themselves, and they don't have anyone to share their riches with. But if you remember, before, he didn't want to share his riches. Right? What's the point in gathering and doing all of this stuff and working hard so that I get rich? And then I got to give it to somebody. But here, the fact that he has nobody to give it with, that too is hevel, and it makes people unhappy in their work. So he switches then to why are groups better? And here's one of the more famous verses, perhaps, that we're going to come across. Right? And you could think through, well, why are two people better than one? Why would a group be better than others? What's the point in all this? And he says, well, if you're together, if there's two people and one falls down, the other can help them back up. And if they lie down together, they can keep warm. But if one person falls in a pit by himself, who's going to help him? They're just going to die in the pit. And if two people lie down and they're attacked, well, they can protect and defend each other. And then you have this famous verse, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. And kind of this intertwining. And many people see that, like he was just talking about two, who's the third person here? And many people see it as a veiled reference to God, which is certainly possible, but not dictated by the text. Then finally, towards the end of chapter 4, he switches topics yet again. And he tells this story of a foolish king and a wise youth. There was a poor but wise youth, and he was better than the old but foolish king. And the age here, I think, is important because this would have been seen as a blessing from God, and he must have lived somewhat wisely not to have died earlier in life. But he's foolish because he refuses to take advice. And so Koheleth seems that even somebody who's been in prison could get out, and even though they're poor, they could rule the whole kingdom better than this king. And I'm just guessing that there have been some leaders that you've seen either in our country or at work, and you're like, a child could rule this company or this country better than the fool who's sitting in that seat. We've all been there, of course. So then he tells the story of a youth coming to reign. And this person came up and everybody on earth followed him and not the foolish king. There was no end to his followers. But eventually he's going to die and no one is going to remember him. No one's going to rejoice in him. And so he ends as you think he would. Surely this is hevel and a chasing after wind. A happy, happy author of the Bible here. This is a lot of stuff, and it is indeed quite heavy. So let me pause here, and hopefully that gives you somewhat of a sense, as like I said, is this convoluted way that his mind seems to be working, and it really feels like this stream of consciousness. As he ends one topic, whatever comes next is what he writes on. And I know people that write journals like that, especially if they're authors, and just what they'll take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe longer, and just whatever comes into their mind, they write down as kind of a creative outlet. And then sometimes they'll use that for their own, in writing narratives or stories or fiction or whatever else it happens to be, poetry. Any questions here on what we've gone through? That was drinking from the fire hose. Do any of Kohelet's observations resonate with you?
I was thinking about this, things that we do now, whether they get remembered, by future generations. I was talking with my neighbor today as we were walking, and what interesting stories that she has of her of her father and her father's family. Her father escaped during the period of the Holocaust.
Oh my
And
goodness.
some really interesting stories, but family members aren't that interested right now, in them, but maybe when they get older. But the thing is that family members experience a lot of things, but then along the way it gets lost. I mean,
Yep.
those memories don't really continue. I mean, people don't necessarily keep those memories.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, earlier, my great-great-great-grandfather who owned land in Luray or whatever. Someone only recently found that out, and I know pretty much nothing about him. I have this great uncle who was in World War II, and I know that he was an admiral. Know nothing else about him. It's quite possible my kids won't even know that much, and more than likely their kids most certainly won't. And you think through, going back, is a lot of this stuff does fade out of memory. You're right. And same thing with stuff. I remember, so I grew up evangelical, and there was a lot of T-shirts that went out. There was a company, I think in the 90s, there was a company called No Fear that came out with different slogans across T-shirts and things like that. Basically, kind of some macho bravado type thing. And a Christian group got it and changed it to Real Fear. And one of their slogans was, "He who dies with the most toys still dies." And trying to point out some of this stuff about what he said is I got all of this stuff, the things that personally would, everybody would attach themselves to this and want this. It's the perfect life. And I still die. And it becomes problematic. Rowan is saying, I had a great something who was a mayor of a small town in the South and faked his death to see what his wife did with his whiskey. That is an awesome story. He was Irish, and that's all I know about him.
I wish I knew more because he sounds fascinating.
Yeah, my goodness.
But yes, the story no one remembers.
What a motive too, man. Well, I guess if my games ever disappear, I might do the same thing then.
What's interesting is that some of these stories could be kept through ancestry.
Yeah.
I mean, people can attach stories about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, I'm
I
gonna end up going.
I'm just gonna add, I like the fact that at some point you go in, like the stories go in and out. They don't necessarily all, I mean, like you said, right? You just imagine myself journaling and then looking back, my entry from probably like Monday does not even connect to anything remotely today. And that's how but that's just how my brain works. And my brain is, like the majority, right? We're all contradictions of what we're experiencing or living in that moment.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. And it can get, if you want everything to be kind of nice, neat, orderly, and in a box, especially when you're dealing with like theology and something as important as sacred scripture, then you come to this book and go, well, that's out the window. One of the things I'm going to say, and I put in the handout, is I almost feel like walking the journey with Kohelet is almost more important than coming up with his conclusions. Because there's this sense in which you're really challenged to kind of do this on your own. What is it I go to for meaning in life? Is it actually meaningful, or is it fleeting, transitory, pointless, and meaningless, like the stuff that Kohelet looked at? And that can be a really pointed, powerful, convicting, painful question to ask. And I think this challenges us, to walk along that. All right. I'm going to jump back into this. Otherwise, we're going to be here until tomorrow. I've got too many slides tonight. In the second half of the book, he gets into more of some of these poetic type things that start to feel a bit more like Proverbs, with these short little bursts of, almost the fortune cookie type thing. And one that he does here in chapter 7 is these better than sayings. So a good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death, better than the day of birth. Like, that seems odd. But then you go down to verse 8, and better is the end of a thing than its beginning. Maybe that's why the day of death is better, because now I've finished the race. And that's better than just starting the race, perhaps. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of countenance the heart is made glad. It's out of sorrow that we end up happy. And and things like that. And I think to some degree, that's why we're drawn to sad movies. And there's a sense in which we like to cry and be sad along with them. And you can see some of the others or read them on your own. He talks about the unpredictability of life. And this is rather interesting because here he starts pushing back against some of the retribution principle. The people who should win at life just don't. Oh, I'm in the wrong, there we go, in 11. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. This time and chance thing, stuff you can't prepare for, it gets in the way and can ruin all of these different things. And nobody can know the time of disaster. So he kind of uses all of this to set it up that we're basically like fish in a net or birds in a snare. That's just like we are when calamity hits. What are we supposed to be able to do when calamity hits? You know, all of your planning and preparation, you've got everything perfect that first day of live streaming at the church, and the power goes out and you can't stream anything. You've saved up all of your money and put it in the bank, and then 2008 happens. And now what do? You've been, working all your life to finally get that degree that nobody that nobody in your family has ever gotten. And then for whatever reason, you run out of money and you can't finish that last semester. And it hits you. What are we supposed to do with this? Life is unpredictable. Chance overtakes us. And there's kind of this implication of, if it's all this unpredictable, why bother planning and putting in that hard work? The closing poem mirrors the opening poem. And if you remember, the first one was kind of like, what's the meaning of life and what do we get from life and from all our toil? And here it's death is inevitable. The end is coming, and there will be a day when light will fade, people will stop talking, sounds will cease, people will stop working. Everybody's going to be afraid. Nature will break. Nature will signal the end. So it mentions almond trees and things like that, which are typical symbols of like something is about to come. And the dust will return to the earth, and the breath, which is ruach in Hebrew, which also means spirit, that will return to God. And so the conclusion is, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. While you are young enough to understand God, keep him in your mind, so that when these days come at the end and disaster falls upon you at the end, you will still be in the right relationship with God. The book closes in the third person, as I mentioned before, and it ends with Hevel Hevelim. Everything is Hevel. And in my Bible, I don't like this. It puts verse 8 in the same paragraph as verse 7. I think it should start a new paragraph. It kind of repeats this theme kind of throughout the book, that everything is Hevel, however we understand that. And then it gives an assessment of Koheleth. He was a wise man, a good teacher, and he sought to find pleasing words, and he wrote plainly. Objection. This wasn't necessarily plain and easy to read, and it wasn't necessarily pleasing. It's really kind of tough to be told, that job you've been working at for 30, 40 years, you're just going to have all that money, give it to somebody else. It was meaningless. You should have just done something you enjoyed anyway. It's a hard statement. Then it goes through, and we might agree with this more, as an assessment of the wise, of just the wisdom tradition. It's like goads and nails. He says, don't go beyond them. And he says, with much study, it's very wearisome. And with the end, with the writing of books, there is no end. I actually have this written in Hebrew on a mug that I got from an academic conference, that study is wearisome and that there's too many books out there. But like goads and nails, that sounds painful, but it's keeping you in line. And it's almost like a reference to Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And again, I remember having the paddle in school. Rods and staffs are not necessarily comforting, but they keep you in line and keep you on the right way and lead you towards life in many respects. The question is, did Kohelet write this section, this assessment of things and looking back in this conclusion, or was this added by somebody else? The main consensus in academic circles is that this was probably written by somebody else. I think it is quite possible it was written by Kohelet. So I'm not sold one way or the other, but my recommendation would be is to read the book as a whole. Whether it was added, whether it's original or not, is to see this as part of the whole experience and to read it as a whole. One of the things I don't like about much of 20th century biblical scholarship, if you pick up many books, is they try and find the sources and read the sources individually. But we've been given it as a whole, and I think we're intended to read it that way. Finally, we come to the appendix, and this is the last piece of the book. I'm going to somewhat fly through this. But the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. Because God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. This brings it back in a much more orthodox way. And some people think that this was absolutely added by somebody else who took this craziness of the rest of the book and tried to frame it in a more positive light. That's possible. It's also possible that somebody who's wrestled with meaning all throughout his life and has gone through all these different things has actually come down to it and said, you know what? There is only one thing that's meaningful in life. And you could think people mentioning some of the stuff you mentioned, relationships, God himself, scripture, love for other people. These are the things that matter. You want to, what do you want people to say at your funeral? That's how you should act now. And so I think it is possible that this is here. The problem is there's not huge connection to the rest of the book. There's not much about God's commands in the book, but there is in 12:1. And there's not much about fearing the Lord. In fact, it never says the Lord. It says God. But there is talk in a couple of places about fearing God. 5:7 is one example. So there is some connection to it. And other stuff in the book shows that God is sovereign and that God's going to judge, which is what you get here in verse 14. So there is more connection there than I think what many people give it credit for. But I don't know that that solidly answers the question as whether this was an attempt to make the book more orthodox or if this is genuine conclusions from the book. I lean towards the second one, that it's probably genuine and kind of an abrupt end. I've gone on long enough. I got to end this whole thing up. And you get this statement that almost seems to come out of nowhere. It doesn't really come out of nowhere. And I think this puts it in perspective. I've got a couple of things here, and I was going to spend more time on it, but I'm running out of time. But God in Ecclesiastes, it's almost a negative perception. It always uses Elohim, which is the general term for God, not Yahweh, which would be the more personal Israel relationship with God. So this makes it seem like God is, although he's good and gives good things, he's aloof, transcendent, and over there. He sees turmoil, he sees injustice, but he never reaches down to help. He can seem random and almost capricious in some ways, and his logic is not necessarily easy to discern. So kind of Kohelet's conclusion is, don't rebel against God, but enjoy God and enjoy what he's given you. There's some stuff in here about wisdom in which it pushes back against the retribution principle, and yet, although he'll say it's hevel, he always says that wisdom is better than folly. So it puts him in line with the general wisdom tradition. And we have seen that he does talk about the retribution principle in somewhat positive ways. And it is worth noting that in the end, though I think it says, besides being wise, the teacher taught the people knowledge. It very well could be, besides being a wise man, the teacher taught the people knowledge. And so now saying that he himself is a sage. So he's not rejecting the whole wisdom tradition. He's a part of it, and this is his contribution to it. So many people see him as a cynic or a skeptic and kind of rejecting it all. Not quite there. He actually has quite a bit to say about justice. He sees that retribution is not dependable because the just die, the wicked survive, people do evil because there's no penalty. If I can get away with it, why bother? What's the point? And he sees it's a real problem, that oppression is a real problem, and that no one, I think he says, I found one man in 1,000 and no just women, right? So it's like, there's nobody There's nobody who's just. Everybody's evil, corrupt. They're taking, liberties with other people. And even to a certain degree, God's justice is questioned, but it's not rejected. Eventually, he does see that there will be a time when God will judge. And so we can trust him. And yet, as you can well imagine, he says injustice is just hevel. It frustrates him. He hates this. He does not like the injustice in the world. So is it a pessimistic or optimistic book? There's actually arguments to be both sides. The pessimism seems to shine through much more clearly because of this repetition that everything is hevel, there's no profit, there's nothing good under the sun, and the fact that death seems to ruin everything. And yet he says, eat, drink, and be merry. Enjoyment is a gift from God. God will, in fact, judge at the appropriate time. So enjoy love. Enjoy the wife of your youth. Enjoy the stuff that you have. And always remember, wisdom is better than folly. Oh, it's both. And one thing I find really interesting is this book is part of what's called the Megiloth, which are 5 short books in the Old Testament that are read during Jewish festivals. And so I've got it here. So you would read the Song of Songs during Passover. You would read Ruth during the Feast of Weeks. Lamentations, which is very sad on the 9th of Av, when they lament all the horrors that have happened to the Jewish people throughout history, from Egypt to Babylon and the Shoah and everything else. And then you have Ecclesiastes on Sukkot, which is the Feast of Booths. And that celebrates the harvest and God's provision in the desert. It is a happy day. It's a joyous holiday. And the book that gets read for it, out of all the books in the Old Testament, is Ecclesiastes. That puts an interesting spin on the way people have understood this. So real quickly, takeaways. Again, I always fly through this, but I think these things are important. I think absolutely wrestle with life and look for meaning. Walk this journey along Kohelet and really follow where it takes you, but keep in mind this maintaining a fear of God in all things at all times. Keep that relationship. Remember your Creator in your youth. Rejoice in the gifts God has given you. You ask people, hey, how you doing? Oh, I can't complain. And my first thought is, I can usually find a reason. Like, there's always something to complain about, and yet he's given us so much, rejoicing in those things. I think pursuing wisdom and justice would make Kohelet happy. Remembering that we are dust, and to dust we shall return, really, I think, should be in the back of our minds. One of my old pastors used to say when he was growing up, he goes, people would talk about death, and nobody would talk about sex. Nowadays, everybody talks about sex, and no one talks about death. But death is a reality, and that should influence kind of the way that we live. Am I putting my time into things that really matter, or am I wasting it on this stupid stuff behind me? And you can see my screen, so you know where I've gone with this. Ultimate meaning is found in God, not in stuff. And then looking at this from a Christian perspective, you look at Jesus in his life, and even in his death, he maintains a fear of God and keeps God's commands. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. And I think perhaps the most important contribution Jesus has given us in light of this text is that for Kohelet, death is the end. For us, it is not. Death does not get the final word. Jesus does. And I think it's the story of, was it Churchill, who at his death, they played taps and followed it up immediately with reveille. It's time to get up. It's time to get up. It's time to get up in the morning. And there's a real sense. And my old pastor, he wants his tombstone to read, Ken Cross, now enjoying the rest of his life. And I think that really gets out of what a lot of St. Paul says that Christ does for us through his death and resurrection. So there's takeaways with that. And I've got all these listed out in the handouts. So I'm sorry I've gone over, but are there questions, comments, thoughts, arguments, rebuttals?
This is Tony, and I don't have this all together yet, but when I finished reading this, and now with your notes and your input, this seems like a person, whether it was written by one person or not, I don't know, but seems like a person who has had a lot of time to reflect on his life and
Yeah.
perhaps the lives of people around him. And pessimism and optimism were devices he used to intentionally to tell this, because for me, it does end on up note for me.
I agree.
And that up note is that, you know, life really, first of all, no matter what we have or what we don't have, life isn't worth living if we don't have God in it. And that is the most important thing. And he does end this with that kind of he does have that kind of ending for it, for us. And it seems like someone who has done a lot of reflecting
Mm-hmm.
and used things that he has seen in his life, the things he himself has done in his life, to share this with God's people.
Yeah.
And my feelings about it are, especially after tonight, are somewhat different from all the other times I've read it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's actually quite uplifting for me now.
Oh, that's
And
good.
and I didn't realize it until you repeated something that I read and underlined. I was flipping through my Bible as you were talking, because a lot of the points that you brought up, I had underlined or highlighted. And yesterday was my grandson's 12th birthday. And one of the things that I had written in his birthday card was, remember to take God with you all your life,
Mm.
and he will lead you on the right path. And I don't know if that came to me from having read this, although I constantly talk to my godchildren about, and my grandchildren rather, about that, about living a godly life.
Yeah.
But that statement that I wrote now to me sounds very much like something that came out of this.
No, that's beautiful.
And it's made me feel great.
That's
You
good.
ask about what brings you joy. This is the kind of thing that brings me joy.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And
Thank
for you to say,
Let
it
me
seems
know.
like somebody who's kind of reflecting on their life and has time to do this.
Mhm.
Traditionally, I've heard it said that people think, you know, that King Solomon wrote Proverbs in his youth, Song of Songs in his youth, Proverbs in his prime, and
Mhm.
Ecclesiastes on his deathbed. And kind of,
And it's funny. That's exactly what that's exactly what I thought while you were talking. That's where this came from. So thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah.
I think
Kathy Berry, thank you, Kathy Berry.
I think part of the power of this, as you went through this, Doctor, is that depending on the lens you're using to read it, it can really be inspiring for you, or it just would add to it. Like if you're already feeling depressed, it probably just feeds that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking for a little inspiration from being down, you can find it here too. And I think that's powerful in the way it's written.
that's a really, really good point. Really good. Anything else? All right. Well, next week we'll conclude our study of wisdom literature by looking at the Wisdom of Solomon. It's a beautiful book. It's not super long. I want to say it's about 12 chapters, about the same length as here. And it is a far more uplifting, happy, and a way easier read. So if you get the chance, try and read the whole thing. And if you can't, that's totally fine. I don't presuppose that you have, but I think it's helpful if you've got some connection to it. And it might be one you're not familiar with. And if you don't have a Catholic Bible or one that has the Apocrypha in it, you might not be able to find it. So Google it if you need to. It exists out there. But otherwise, I'll see you all next week.